By the time the certified letter hit my porch, the neighborhood had already decided I was the kind of woman who let things fall apart. The lawn had gone a little wild after the storm. One shutter hung crooked for 3 weeks. And because my husband had walked out 6 months earlier with half the furniture, all the easy lies came together for them in one neat picture. Unstable marriage, messy house, unpaid dues. What none of them knew was that I had paid every HOA bill on time for 11 years. What none of them knew was that the notice in my hand wasn't a warning about weeds or paint. It was a foreclosure threat. And what absolutely none of them knew was that someone on that board had been helping my ex-husband set me up to lose the house before the divorce was even final. I stood on the front steps reading the letter 3 times because the number didn't make sense. According to the association's attorney, I owed 18 months of assessments, late fees, attorney fees, special compliance charges, and accelerated collection costs. They gave me 10 days to cure the default before they would proceed with legal remedies against the property. The property, not me. The house itself. That language landed colder than anything else. I had enough legal experience from the divorce to know when a letter was written to scare you and when it was written to build a file. This was a file-building letter, formal, deliberate, timed. It had my name spelled correctly, the parcel number, the lot designation, the recording reference from the deed, and a ledger attached like they expected a judge to glance at it one day and nod. I walked inside, put the envelope on the kitchen counter, and opened my bank app with shaking hands. Every monthly payment to Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association was there. 11 years of them, first from our joint account, then from mine after Ethan moved out and pretended separate finances, were somehow a moral principle instead of a strategy. I had routing numbers, cleared transactions, payment confirmations, even the memo lines. HOA dues, HOA dues, HOA dues. A perfect little heartbeat of regularity, which meant one of 2 things. Either the management company was incompetent in a way that had suddenly become very expensive for me, or somebody had redirected, altered, or buried the record on purpose. I called the number on the letter. A receptionist answered with the crisp, bored politeness of someone who had already decided my panic was administrative noise. She transferred me to collections. Collections transferred me to a paralegal. The paralegal told me the account was in active legal review and that all communication should be in writing. I said I had proof of payment. She said I was free to submit documentation. I asked why the ledger showed delinquencies on months where my bank clearly reflected cleared drafts. She paused for half a second, just enough to tell me she saw the trap in the question. Then she said their records came from the association's management portal and were presumed accurate unless corrected. Presumed accurate. I wrote the phrase down because I knew I was going to hate it later. When I got off the phone, I called my divorce attorney, not because HOA law was her specialty, but because she understood what Ethan looked like when he was moving pieces behind the wall. Mara had represented women like me for 15 years, women who kept being told they were overreacting, right up until the subpoenas came back. She listened quietly while I read the letter, word for word. Then she asked the first question nobody else had asked. Who on the board is close to him? I didn't answer right away because the name arrived too fast. Brent Calloway. Treasurer, real estate broker, golf partner, the kind of man who wore cheerful quarter zips and talked about community values while circling opportunities like a bird that had learned to smile. Brent and Ethan had gotten close the last 2 years of our marriage. Poker nights, Saturday drinks, whispered conversations that stopped when I stepped outside. Ethan used to say Brent understood how property really works. At the time, I thought it meant investment chatter. Standing in my kitchen with a foreclosure letter in my hand, it sounded uglier. Mara told me not to contact the board, not yet. She told me to send a written dispute immediately to the association's attorney and management company, attaching proof of every payment from the disputed period. She told me to request the full account history, general ledger detail, copies of every violation notice, minutes from any board meeting where my lot had been discussed, and the governing documents authorizing foreclosure. Then her voice shifted into that tone she used when she was already 5 moves ahead. And pull your county property record today. Make sure this is the only problem attached to your house. That sentence changed the whole day. At the county clerk's website, I found the deed exactly where it should be. My original purchase, years before the marriage, remained the chain's anchor. Then the refinance after we married. Then the marital agreement we had recorded during the renovation loan. Nothing obviously catastrophic, but 2 pages deeper, I found a notice I had never seen before. A request for mailing address change filed 4 months ago, directing association correspondence for the property to a post office box across town. The form carried my electronic signature. My name looked right. Too right. It looked like the version of my signature from scanned documents. Smooth where a pen should have dragged, slightly flattened, almost polished by software. My stomach went hollow. I drove to the post office the same afternoon. The clerk couldn't tell me much without legal process, but she did confirm the box existed and that my name was not listed as an authorized recipient in person. When I got back to the car, Ethan was calling. I almost laughed. He hadn't returned a single divorce-related email in 2 days, but somehow he could sense the movement like weather. You got the letter, he said. Not hello, not how are you, just that. I asked him why HOA notices had been redirected. He went quiet, then gave a soft little exhale. His version of patience for a woman he believed was slower than him. You're behind, Claire. They've been trying to reach you for months. I told Brent you've been overwhelmed. I stared through the windshield at a woman pushing a stroller across the parking lot while my marriage rearranged itself into its final ugly shape. So you admit you talked to Brent? Everyone talks to Brent. He's the treasurer. You told them I was behind. I told them you weren't managing things well. There it was. Not a denial, a framing. My eyes closed for 1 second. Why would you tell anyone that about the house I bought before I met you? His voice cooled. Because if you lose it in foreclosure, the court won't have much left to fight over. He said it like a theory, like a market condition. Like the destruction of my stability was just one possible route through a complex system. Then he added the part he thought would break me. You should probably settle before this gets uglier. When I hung up, I called Mara back from the parking lot, and for the first time since he moved out, I cried. Not because I was afraid of him. That part had burned out months ago. I cried because clarity can feel like grief when it arrives all at once. The missing mail, the pressure to sign a lopsided property stipulation, the weird friendliness from Brent at the last association barbecue, the fines for violations I had never seen, the subtle campaign among neighbors that I was not coping. It wasn't random, it wasn't administrative chaos, it was a pressure system. They were trying to create a paper crisis around my house and use the panic to corner me in the divorce. The next week became a war of documents. I sent the dispute package that night. 87 pages, tabbed and indexed, every cleared HOA payment highlighted. Mara sent preservation letters to the association, the management company, and their counsel, demanding they retain all correspondence related to my account, including portal changes, internal notes, mailing address updates, board communications, and access logs. She also filed an emergency motion in family court to prohibit either party from interfering with marital property-related records or third-party communications pending final asset division. Ethan's lawyer responded with the usual silk-wrapped nonsense that his client had merely tried to help me manage missed notices during a difficult emotional period. Help. The word made me want to put my fist through drywall. 3 days later, the management company produced a partial ledger. It was worse than I expected. Payments had been received, but many had been suspended, reallocated, or held in unapplied status because of alleged unresolved compliance charges. Compliance charges based on violation notices mailed to the post office box. Not my home, not my email, not my actual hands. Then, once the account appeared technically delinquent, late fees and legal fees stacked month after month until the balance looked monstrous enough to justify foreclosure review. It was a machine, and somebody had fed my payments into it while pretending I had stopped paying altogether. Mara told me to breathe because the ledger contained something beautiful: timestamps. Every account alteration had a user trail. Not names yet, but user IDs. And one of the most significant changes, the mailing address update, had been made from a user profile with administrative privileges on a Sunday night at 10:14 p.m. The association office was closed on Sundays. The management company later claimed remote access was normal, but when we demanded the IP logs, they stalled. Then they stalled again. People stall when the truth needs shoes. Meanwhile, the neighborhood started whispering louder. A lien had been posted. Brent made sure of it. The notice went up on the community portal under delinquent account enforcement, not displaying my name outright, but enough identifying detail that every bored retiree with too much coffee could match the lot number to my house. Suddenly, women who once complimented my hydrangeas were looking at me with sweet, pitying eyes. Men at the mailbox stopped conversations when I approached. One afternoon, a neighbor I barely knew asked if I was going through some financial stuff. I smiled so hard it hurt and told her I was going through discovery. Then came the hearing notice from the HOA's counsel. They intended to seek judicial foreclosure if the account was not cured in full. Mara found local co-counsel who specialized in community association litigation, a sharp man named Julian who had the unnerving calm of someone who truly enjoyed catching arrogant people in their own records. He reviewed everything in 2 hours and said the sentence I had been waiting to hear. If the payments cleared and they manufactured delinquency through notice manipulation, this doesn't just kill the foreclosure. It raises fraud, bad faith collection, and selective enforcement exposure. His mouth barely moved when he said it, but I felt my pulse kick. We subpoenaed the management company's portal logs, the board's meeting minutes, and Brent's communications related to my property. Ethan's lawyer objected to almost everything, which told me Brent was not some incidental friend offering casual commentary. He was inside the engine. A week later, under pressure from a judge who did not enjoy games, the first production landed. There it was. Emails between Brent and the association manager. Brent forwarding Ethan's messages. Brent suggesting they tighten enforcement because I was emotionally erratic and likely to ignore standard compliance outreach. Brent asking whether unpaid balances could be accelerated if exterior maintenance violations remained unresolved. Brent recommending alternate mailing to ensure sensitive financial matters don't trigger domestic conflict at the residence. And then the line that changed the entire case. An email from Ethan to Brent, sent months before the first official delinquency entry, reading, "If the pressure gets high enough, she'll sign the property stip and move. Just don't make it obvious it came from me." I read that email 3 times in Mara's office, while Julian leaned back in his chair and let the silence do its work. Everything after that moved fast. The management company tried to claim Brent had no authority over operational account handling. Then the portal log showed Brent's board-linked credentials had been used to view and annotate my account repeatedly, including the same weekend the mailing address changed. He denied accessing the system personally. Then an IP report tied those sessions to his office network. He said staff may have been using it. Then the minutes from a closed board discussion described treasurer follow-up on my file. Lie by lie, the ground shifted under them. But the biggest twist came from somewhere I had almost stopped looking, my own divorce file. Mara's forensic accountant had been tracing Ethan's post-separation expenditures because his income disclosures kept wobbling in suspicious little ways. She found monthly reimbursements from Brent's brokerage business to Ethan labeled as consulting. Small at first, then larger. Then one final payment made the week the foreclosure threat was issued. Memo line, CR holdout. When the accountant dug deeper, she found Brent had been trying to line up a pocket listing for my property through an investor client who specialized in distressed acquisitions within HOA communities. They had not merely wanted to scare me. They had wanted a pathway to force a sale or settlement discount on a house whose equity had grown far beyond what Ethan could touch fairly in court. My home was not collateral damage. It was the target. I remember sitting very still when that landed. Sometimes rage is hot. Sometimes it is cold enough to preserve evidence. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just asked Mara what we could do that would hurt in the language men like Brent and Ethan actually understood. She said, "We amend everything." Julian filed counterclaims against the association and moved to enjoin all foreclosure activity. Mara moved for sanctions and an unequal distribution adjustment in the divorce based on Ethan's bad faith scheme to manipulate property value and force settlement through third-party pressure. We also referred the forged mailing address change and signature issue for criminal review, though everyone warned me not to expect lightning there. Civil court started listening. The injunction hearing took place on a wet Thursday morning that smelled like old carpet and rain. Brent came in wearing a navy suit and the expression of a man who still believed tone could outrank facts. Ethan sat 2 rows behind him, jaw tight, refusing to look at me. Their lawyers tried first to reduce everything to clerical confusion. Unfortunate communication gaps, overzealous collections, a misunderstood effort to redirect mail during domestic instability. Julian let them build that little castle. Then he started laying down exhibits one by one. My payment history, the reallocated ledger entries, the forged address form, Brent's emails, the portal logs, Ethan's message about raising pressure until I signed, the reimbursement trail, the investor communication referencing a potential distressed transfer after domestic resolution. The judge's face changed gradually. Not dramatic, just less patient with each page. When Brent's attorney argued, there was no proof the foreclosure threat had been issued in bad faith. Julian read aloud Brent's own line about tightening enforcement to produce leverage. That was the moment the room turned. You can feel it sometimes. The exact second a lie stops being plausible and starts becoming expensive. The court halted the foreclosure process immediately, ordered the lien reviewed, required a full forensic accounting of my HOA account by an independent neutral, barred further collection action pending that review. And in family court later that same afternoon, the judge sanctioned Ethan for discovery abuse tied to the concealed reimbursement payments and reopened issues he had assumed were nearly settled. His lawyer looked like a man watching furniture being loaded out of the wrong house. Still, the real power reversal didn't come until the neutral accounting report arrived 3 weeks later. I had overpaid, not underpaid. Overpaid by enough that, absent manipulated fees and notice redirection, my account would have remained in good standing the entire time. The report identified improper fee stacking, unsupported compliance charges, and procedural irregularities serious enough to void the claimed delinquency entirely. The association, suddenly terrified of its own exposure, tried to separate itself from Brent and the management company. Too late. Brent resigned. The management company's insurer got involved. Settlement language began floating across inboxes like smoke. Ethan called me the night his attorney received Mara's revised property proposal. For the first time in months, he sounded small, not apologetic. Men like him often confuse weakness with remorse. But small. He said things had gotten out of hand. He said Brent had taken initiative. He said nobody expected the records to look the way they did. I stood in my living room, hand resting on the windowsill he once leaned against while planning my collapse, and listened until he ran out of softer words to hide the same rotten core. Then I told him the house would remain mine. The sanctions motion would proceed unless he accepted terms by morning. He would waive any claim that the HOA cloud or resulting distress reduced the home's distributive value. He would stipulate that he had no possessory interest beyond what had already been adjudicated. He would pay a portion of my attorney's fees from his brokerage account distributions, and he would never again communicate with any board member, vendor, agent, or third party regarding my property. Silence hung there for a beat. Then he asked, "You really think you can do this?" I looked around my house, the chipped mug on the counter, the patched wall in the hallway, the lamp I bought before I knew him, the front door that had held against weather and gossip and conspiracy alike. "No," I said softly. "I already did." He settled 2 days later. By the end of the month, the lien was released, the foreclosure threat withdrawn, the association issued a formal correction, and Brent was facing his own civil mess, with more than one angry insurer watching. Some neighbors avoided eye contact. Some suddenly became kind again. I learned not to confuse either response with character. The truth is, communities are often just small theaters for larger hungers. Control, access, proximity to value. A nice sign at the entrance doesn't purify any of that. The day the final release was recorded, I walked to the mailbox at sunset and opened it slowly, almost ceremonially. Just catalogs, one electric bill, and a handwritten note from an older widow 2 streets over. She said she had seen more than she'd said. She said she was sorry. She said she was glad I stayed. I stood there with the note in my hand while the sprinklers clicked on up and down the block. Tiny mechanical heartbeats in a place that had nearly swallowed me whole. People think foreclosure starts with poverty. Sometimes it starts with paperwork. Sometimes it starts with a man who cannot get the house through law. So he tries to get it through pressure, shame, and engineered default. Sometimes it starts with a board member who thinks procedure can be weaponized quietly enough to pass for governance. But endings belong to whoever keeps the records, asks one more question, and refuses to panic on schedule. They threatened foreclosure because they thought fear would make me sloppy. They thought humiliation would make me settle. They thought the language of fees and liens and property codes would sound too technical for a woman alone in a half-empty house. What they didn't understand was this. I had already survived the loneliest part, the silence after betrayal, the hour after the door closes. The first morning you realize your life has been rearranged without your permission. After that, documents are just documents. Numbers are just numbers. Men are just men. And houses remember who fought to keep them.